You ever sit down to study, open a book, and instantly feel like your mind is shutting down, like the words on the page are written in a language you were never meant to understand, and in that moment, you quietly decide that this subject just isn't for you, that maybe some people are simply not built for it. But what if that feeling is not a sign of your limitation? What if it is actually a signal that you have never been shown how to break something difficult into something simple? Because the truth is, no subject is truly hard. It is only presented in a way that feels overwhelming when taken all at once. And the real skill that top students develop is not intelligence, but the ability to shrink complexity into manageable pieces, to take what looks impossible and turn it into something they can hold, examine, and understand step by step. And the moment you learn this, everything begins to change, because instead of running away from difficult subjects, you begin to approach them with curiosity, with a quiet confidence that says there is always a way in, and that way begins with one simple shift in thinking. You stop trying to understand everything at once, and instead focus on understanding just one small part, because the brain does not fail when things are hard. It fails when things are unclear and overloaded. So your job is not to push harder, but to make things clearer, to break chapters into topics, topics into subtopics, and subtopics into single ideas that can be understood in isolation. And when you do this, something powerful happens. The subject that once felt like a wall begins to feel like a staircase, and every step you take builds momentum. But most students never reach this point because they get stuck in the habit of avoidance. They look at a difficult subject and delay it until the pressure becomes unbearable, and then they try to learn everything in a rush, which only reinforces the belief that the subject is too hard, creating a cycle that repeats itself every exam season. But you are about to break that cycle by learning to approach difficulty differently, not as something to fear, but as something to organize. Because every difficult subject has a hidden structure, a pattern that becomes visible only when you slow down and start asking the right questions. What is the core idea here? What are the supporting concepts? How do they connect? Once you begin to see this structure, you realize that what once looked like chaos is actually a system waiting to be understood. And the more you practice breaking things down, the faster your mind adapts, until one day you sit down with a subject you used to avoid, and instead of feeling overwhelmed, you feel in control, because you know exactly where to start and exactly how to move forward, one small step at a time, building clarity, building confidence, and slowly transforming your weakest subject into something that no longer intimidates you, but challenges you in a way that makes you stronger. At this point, something subtle begins to shift inside you, because you are no longer reacting emotionally to the subject. You are engaging with it strategically, and that is where real progress is born. But right in the middle of this transformation, there comes a moment that tests everything you have started to build, a moment where even after breaking things down, even after organizing and simplifying, you hit a concept that still refuses to make sense. And this is where most students fall back into old habits. They panic, they assume they have reached their limit, and they quietly retreat, telling themselves they will come back later. But later rarely comes. And this is the exact turning point where your approach must become stronger than your doubt, because that difficult concept is not a dead end, it is a doorway, and the only difference between those who improve and those who stay stuck is the willingness to stay in that uncomfortable space just a little longer, to resist the urge to escape, and instead lean deeper into understanding. Because when something does not make sense, it is not a sign to quit, it is a signal to change your angle, to ask a better question, to look for or a simpler explanation, to connect it with something you already understand. And this is where the method becomes powerful. You start layering your understanding, building from the simplest version of the idea, and gradually adding complexity, instead of trying to swallow everything at once. And as you do this, you begin to notice that confusion is not permanent. It is temporary. It fades as clarity builds, but only if you stay present long enough for that clarity to form. And this is where suspense quietly builds, because you begin to wonder whether you can truly master something you once feared, whether this new approach will actually hold under pressure, especially when exams are getting closer and time feels like it is slipping away. And this pressure can either break your focus or sharpen it, depending on how you respond. Because now you are not just studying content, you are training your mind to handle difficulty, to remain calm in the face of confusion, to trust the process even when results are not immediate. And this trust becomes your greatest advantage, because while others are rushing, memorizing without understanding, and hoping for the best, you are steadily building. G, a foundation that will not collapse under stress. And the more you practice this, the more your confidence grows, not from shortcuts but from genuine comprehension. And slowly the subject that once felt like your biggest weakness begins to reveal its logic, its patterns, its predictability, and you realize something powerful. That difficulty was never meant to stop you. It was meant to shape the way you think. And now that you are thinking differently, you are no longer the same student who once avoided this subject. You are becoming someone who can face complexity without fear, someone who knows how to break it down, rebuild it, and ultimately master it. And now you arrive at the final stage of this transformation, where everything you have practiced begins to come together, not as scattered techniques, but as a powerful habit of thinking that you can apply to any subject, any challenge, any moment of pressure, because what once felt difficult is no longer defined by confusion, but by opportunity, and you start to see exams differently, not as something to fear, but as a chance to prove to yourself that you can take complexity and turn it into clarity, that you can sit in front of a question that once would have intimidated you and approach it calmly, step by step, breaking it down just like you trained yourself to do, identifying what the question is really asking, connecting it to the concepts you have already simplified, and building your answer with confidence. And this confidence is not loud or arrogant. It is quiet and steady, built from the hours you spent understanding instead of memorizing, from the moments you chose not to give up when things were unclear. And this is where your weakest subject begins to transform into your strongest advantage, because while others may overlook it or avoid it, you have faced it directly. You have taken it apart and rebuilt it piece by piece, and that process has given you something far more valuable than just marks. It has given you control over your learning, and once you have that, no subject can truly overwhelm you again, because you know the method, you know how to approach the unknown, and that realization changes everything. It shifts your identity from someone who struggles with difficult subjects to someone who knows how to master them. And as this identity strengthens, so does your performance, because your actions begin to align with your belief. You study with purpose, you revise with clarity, and you walk into your exams with a sense of readiness that cannot be faked. And even if you encounter something unexpected, you no longer freeze. You adapt, you think, you break it down, and you move forward, because you understand that success is not about knowing everything. It is about knowing how to handle what you do not know. And this mindset becomes your greatest asset, not just in exams, but in every area of your life, because challenges will always exist, complexity will always appear, but now you carry a method that turns obstacles into steps, confusion into understanding, and fear into focus, and that is what truly sets you apart. That is what allows you to grow beyond limits you once believed were real. And as you continue this journey, remember that every difficult subject you conquer is not just a victory in academics. It is proof that you are capable of far more than you once imagined. And if you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.